Welcome to the Kubernetes SIG Cloud Provider meeting for July 31st, 2024. We follow the CNCF and Kubernetes Code of Conduct, so be sure to treat each other with respect. Today we will possibly come back to bug scrub and triage because we have one agenda item to chat about that Elmiko brought up that he thought would be a good place for us to start. So I will turn it over to you, Michael, and let you choose to share if you would like to walk through the thing you're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. Let me see. Let me see if I can share a screen here.
And this is a suggestion from the most excellent Antonio about how to run CCMs.
Right. Yeah.
We were
So,
suggesting this would be a way to something that we could discuss.
yeah, now I got to just grab the right window here.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, like Antonio had put up a suggestion. Hopefully, I'm sharing. Can everyone see the
You're
agenda?
sharing the agenda, so go ahead and click on the link. Perfect. Gotcha.
So yeah, Antonio had left a comment on this PR that had merged about, the external addresses and whatnot. Trying to help people give some guidance about like what might be the recommended way to run the CCM. And essentially what he's saying is like you should run the CCM like you would run the KCM, typically as a static pod on the control plane. Um, and kind of hinting at the workarounds that people are using with the node IP flag are could be having a bad clash with the way that they're running the CCM if those CCM pods are just landing on any node in the cluster. So Joel kind of pointed this out to me, and I, I think like I think it would be good for us to have probably more discussion about how to run the CCMs, but I don't necessarily think that like just always saying to run them as static pods is like the right way to do this. I get what Antonio's getting at, but I was wondering like, do we want to talk about this more as a group and maybe, figure out if I had said internally, like I thought this might be a good opportunity for a blog post talking about, how do you run the CCMs and kind of what are the different options and what are the pitfalls that you might want to avoid if you're choosing to run the CCM one way over the other way. So really, I wanted to bring it here for discussion and see if people had opinions on like how do they run their CCMs? Do you think we should have more guidance about this? What if you, I mean, I realize we're talking to most of the cloud provider authors here, so maybe it's not the best audience. But anyways, this is where we're starting. So does anybody have thoughts?
I'm going to look at Joel since you said that he had commented.
Yeah, so I read this and I don't really get it. Like deploy the Cloud Controller Manager the same way as you do your Kube Controller Manager. There are people out there who deploy Kube Controller Manager as a pod, right? There are some, like in OpenShift, we do use static pods, but we use pods to install them as static pods. So like actually our CCM comes up before the KCM. And it's a very awkward dance for us, at least, to say, okay, we need to get the CCM onto that node first. Like, I don't know how other people install things like KCM, CCM, whatever. But certainly the way that we get it onto the node requires an existing KCM and a bunch of stuff. So yes, we could start deploying it as a static pod, and I understand that if we do that, then there's no need for any node IP stuff because it will already be running before any of the kubelets are. I wasn't sure where this would come from or if it's very, I don't know. I couldn't understand why this was blanket advice, I guess.
Do we think it's trying to solve the very specific problem that Antonio identified there? Like, are we sure it's intended to be as blanket as it sounds? Like that's a little confusing to me.
It does look very blanket from what he's written there. But yes, it is very much related to a lot of these node IP changes that have been going on. There's an open PR which I think might be related, which is 125.337, which we had a bug on, which I'm trying to remember the details of, but I think it's slightly inspired his comment.
Was that another PR on?
Yeah, so it's a KKPR 125.337. I think might be related to why he's posted this. Yeah, so our issue was that without a CCM running, if we shut down the entire control plane and bring it back up, we couldn't get the nodes initialized because they didn't know the IPs. So if we had it as a static pod, then yes, it would have worked because the CCM would have been able to initialize because it wouldn't have needed to be scheduled. So yes, his advice would have solved the problem for us. I'm just not sure whether it's appropriate blanketly to say everyone should run CCM as a static pod.
If people are running CCM as a static pod, I'm guessing just by nature of it being static that would lead to other problems. Like, is this something where we might need to just document trade-offs? Or
Yeah, I mean, the static pods, if I understand correctly, if you update the manifest that exists on disk, then kubelet will update the pod that is running, which is great. But it's a case of, well, how do I update that manifest on disk, right? And there are patterns you can do for that. Like we use highly privileged containers that can access the file system of the host and write that down. But not everyone wants to do that. In a previous life, we used to use Terraform to deploy static pods. So we used immutable infrastructure and we had to replace the entire control plane to make a change. So reconfiguring things there is I guess one trade-off, like depending on your deployment pattern and how you could feasibly set down those static pods might influence what you want to do.
yeah, I see what you're saying. There's definitely trade-offs there. I wonder if Kirthan wants to weigh in because he said in the chat that at AWS also they start as static pods. And I'm wondering is that for specific use cases like Joel's describing, or is it just kind of a blanket? This is the simplest to have as our
Yeah,
default.
it's more of a simplest thing, like just following like similar to how we start KCM. We treat CCM also same as KCM and AP server and scheduler. So we start all the core Kubernetes components in CCM together as a static pods. It's more for simplicity, like that way it's easier to start up or even upgrade for us, like, because for an upgrade would mostly mean like replacing the instance with a new instance with a new working new version of a static pod.
Now that's interesting when you bring up the upgrade path, because I think Joel was describing a potential upgrade path that had maybe more complexity, but then more flexibility or more trade-offs, more options, I should say, in order to make upgrades easier. Like if you were kind of outlining why to do it the way you do it, Joel, would the upgrade optionality be part of the picture? Or is there other compelling reasons that you want that kind of flexibility?
So I'm guessing the topology Kirthan is talking about is part of one of their products that they offer, right? Where a customer doesn't really see the control plane. So it doesn't matter what you
that's correct.
Right. For us, our control planes are on customer sites. And a lot of our customers don't like the idea of rolling their control planes. So we support in-place upgrades, which means we have to come up with a solution to in-place upgrade the static pods. And there is a pattern that we use for that. It's just we decided not to do it for the CCM because we didn't think it was absolutely necessary. Obviously, because of the trade-offs, it's easier to use a deployment. And in fact, if you look at all of the CCMs, they come with manifests that say, here's a deployment, here's how you run it, right? So yeah, we went down that route because we thought that was the recommended approach. We could change, but yeah, for us, the in-place upgrade thing is a massive thing that we have to stick to.
And see, it's very interesting when you say like the recommended approach, and I'm like, buddy, I think we get to make the recommendations. Heaven help us all, but we get to say what is the recommended, and maybe it is a nuanced question of if you do not want to roll your control plane, we recommend this. If you know, like, or if you need to do your in-place upgrades, go for this route. If you can do just replacement, go this, you know what I mean? Like if we kind of give people a rubric, I don't know if that would make sense or if that's too simplistic, but I'm wondering if we can just kind of like in the docs outline a path of like,
Well, I mean, we need to know which one is favored for which then. And I don't think anyone's identified that. So like I'm seeing here, and he gives this list of all the things that the CCM runs, and it's like, yeah, that's what it runs, but your list doesn't make me immediately think, and that's why it needs to be static. It's just like, yeah, it runs a lot of things. We know.
So the issue that we faced, sorry, Mike, is that if you have no running CCM, then the kubelet will come up and it doesn't necessarily know its IP addresses, which means that if you have any pods that rely on the IP addresses, then they can't get them, right? So our issue was that etcd couldn't come up because it needed to know the IP address of the host. It was using the host IP mechanism, which relies on kubelet knowing the node IP. So the theory is if kubelet were there, sorry, if CCM were there, when kubelet started, it could tell the kubelet by the API, which was down. No, actually, this wouldn't have fixed our issue. Never mind.
I don't even understand how that works. Oh wait, Mike's got his hand up. Sorry.
It's okay, keep going. I have kind of a sidereal question.
I'm missing the part, like, so in Equinix Metal we've got physical machines. We run the CCM as a daemon set is what we found has been good for us, not a deployment. But I've never even in the latest Kubernetes, I'm not seeing any nodes come up and not knowing what IP addresses they are or anything like that. And the only kubelet flag we have is the external one.
So I think part of the issue here, right, especially in relation to like, this issue or this PR in conjunction with what Antonio is saying here, I think part of the issue is that like, if you have a kubelet that you've specified node minus node IP to, when it's starting, if it has the discovery stuff in place and the CCM has not started, say on like an early control plane node, then like there's going to be this problem where like the kubelet wants the CCM to discover the right IP address, but like there are occasionally problems discovering the right IP address. And so, or even getting the CCM to come up. So I think what he's saying is that if you were starting like a kubelet on a control plane node, you would want to start the CCM as a static pod there to avoid the problem of having to use the node IP flag, because when that kubelet started, you would know that you had a CCM already running there. And so it would identify the node and properly put, presumably the correct IP address. I think that's part of what he's driving at here. But the reason I'd raised my hand, and I think this is what originally I had thought was, maybe we need to have a blog post that goes into a discussion about this that says, here's why you might want to run it as a static pod. Here's why you might want to run it as a daemon set. Here's why you might want to run it as a deployment, just like provide some of the wisdom that we have from the community so that people could avoid these things, right? So maybe we could engage Antonio to help write us a piece about like, what is the rationale behind running it as a static pod? What are the problems you avoid? Maybe Chris, if you wanted to donate something about like, why would you want to run it as a daemon set, right?
Yeah.
And then likewise, perhaps Joel or myself could contribute something about like, why do we run it as a deployment, and we could talk about the concerns and why a user might want to pick one of these over the other, so that there's no question about why we're kind of saying this. That was kind of my original thinking, at least.
I like that idea. I'm happy to help pull together / edit such a blog post. I would need to work with our other internal teams to see what components they would want to do a write up on. I don't know off the top of my head what approach they'd want to take.
Is
But yeah.
is etcd up before kubelet is up?
Depends on your topology.
Because for us, we need etcd to be up for the cloud manager to pick a leader to be able to do anything. So
Yeah.
there's another reason that I think being the static pod wouldn't work.
A lot of people run etcd as a static pod.
Okay.
That's from my experience, which so your mileage may vary.
Well, what
But-
does kubeadm deploy? Yeah.
Can't say I've ever
Because
used
we're doing whatever kubeadm does. So
Yeah, so Michael, thank you for bringing that up. Bringing it back to your initial point about thinking about publishing some guidance, you brought up the idea of a blog post. I'm a little bit torn because I can see pros and cons to having direct guidance in the docs versus a blog post. The benefit, I think, to a blog post is you can go into a little bit more of the story of why a specific use case is going a certain way and just hear directly from the various teams and their disparate approaches, which of course captures a moment in time and is much more appropriate for a blog post than for docs. My only hesitancy is I'm a little bit wondering if somebody is looking at docs and thinks they see the recommended path. I almost feel like we need to at least make some adjustments to the docs, even if it's just something like there are multiple ways to do this. And there are some documented approaches, see blog post for details. I don't know. I know somebody's going to tell me that it's not a good practice to put a link to a blog post in the docs, but like, yeah, I don't know what people think about in terms of surfacing this sort of advice.
I mean, I think you're going in the right direction, right? Like obviously, or not obviously, but like I think eventually, right, we would want to have some sort of something in our docs that says like you might consider, deploying it this way or that way. What I'm wondering though is that like I was leaning more into what you were saying on the former side, which is a blog post can be a little more informal discussion. We can get into more of the story behind this. I'm wondering if we couldn't like start with a blog post and then from that blog post be able to distill some hard rules that we might put in, not rules, but like some harder guidance that we could put into the actual docs. Because I think this is very nuanced, right? Like I wouldn't want to just say everybody run it as a static pod and that's the way you have to do it because as we see even in this meeting, different providers are having different opinions about the way they want to put it in their products or in their projects or whatever. So I think like
and that wouldn't work for some use cases. Like
right, and it won't work for
Joel
some
was describing, it just won't work.
Right. So if we could have a blog post where we talk about all the problems, and then maybe from that we could distill down and we could say into the actual official docs, like, if you deploy this like this, be aware of these things. If you deploy it like this, be aware of these things. If you deploy it like this, be aware of those things. You should try this one first or something like that. If we could even get to that point, basically.
I think we should take as an action item to go find what, if anything, is in the docs now, so that we can at least see if there is some damage control we need to do about removing or editing something that may be very misleading right now. And then I think we should think about when we would want to publish such a blog post. I'm guessing mid-cycle. This doesn't seem like it's release specific, unless somebody has something for the coming Kubernetes release that, the August release, I don't think has anything sailing it to this, unless I'm missing something, which is certainly possible. I haven't read everything yet that's going to go into it, but I think mid 1.32 cycle in like probably the pre-KubeCon timeframe, October-ish, might be the right time to publish such a blog post. So we should probably try to write it in like August, September-ish. That's just kind of back of the envelope. Pull requests / feedback accepted, of course.
Yeah, I think like timing it out makes good sense. Another action item I would think of is like, I would like to reach out to Antonio to start talking about this idea of like a blog post and maybe getting a little more explanation on what he was thinking, and maybe if he'd want to collaborate on something like that.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of timing things out, another thing, I'm not sure if we've talked about it in this meeting. I think it happened after the most recent meeting. If, yep, the Almico want to talk about what we submitted for the maintainer track and our invitation to people to participate.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me, why don't I
Sorry,
do
I know I'm
this?
changing the subject wildly. So like anything else action item me in this topic before I change the
Right.
subject?
Yeah, does anybody else have comments about this one? If not, I can bring up the draft of what I submitted. Oh, that's not one.
Yeah, if you want to kind of go through that and then we can see who all thinks that they will be at. I think we're for a maintainer session. I know I've seen maintainer sessions with 3 or 4 people, so we aren't limited to just 2 people. Just depending on who's going to be there. But if you want to
Right.
kind of walk
So,
us through what before we try to get people to sign up, walk us through what the topic is.
right. So, we had talked in the past about doing a talk about our future plans, about testing, kind of what comes next. And I think, we had also said that we didn't want to do another like, okay, like cloud, they're really going external now. Like, cause I think we've given that talk like 2 or 3 times at recent KubeCons. So, a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, I had proposed some ideas about, what I think could be the next generation of CCM testing. And this topic is kind of about that. So, what I was envisioning for this talk was that we would talk about, kind of the state of testing before, we talk about a little history, meaning like the state of testing before we migrated the providers to external, then talk about what happened when we migrated the providers to external and how that affected our tests. And in that discussion, we will highlight the difficulties around testing these things as part of the Kubernetes base, and then start to pivot and talk about the future where we could have a testing framework that allows the individual cloud providers to create implementations of the test suite in their repos, and then bring it all together back into a future where we're enabling each of the CCMs on the cloud they're on. And what I would like to do is kind of wrap up with a talk with a discussion of the credits program that CNCF now has and how that could be like a window to tie all this together. So for providers who might be thinking about, obviously we'll talk about testing internal to each provider, right? So that they would know how to run the kubetest suite with their own provider, and they could use that to validate their providers internally. But then we could also pivot to talk about the community side of this, which is, for providers who are thinking about, maybe getting more involved with the open testing, how the credits program and, might be a way to kind of get into the testing infrastructure and then provide these very specific cloud controller tests. And likewise, there could be other tests too, like storage tests and those kind of related things. So that was kind of what I envisioned for this talk. It's less of a hard call to action, although the call to action would be get involved with us, help us build this thing. But it would also be kind of signaling the SIG's intentions towards, we just did this big thing. If we can bite off another chunk and do another big thing, we think this would add a lot of value to like, the CCMs in general and the Kubernetes community in a wider sense. So yeah, so that was kind of what I was thinking. Did anybody have questions or comments about that? Or would anyone like to, to join us, I guess? I take silence as like, violent approval.
I'd join you. But yeah.
Cool.
Great. And let's see, I'm guessing Joel may be keeping his powder dry for London in the spring, so I don't know if he's going to make it to Salt Lake City, but
It very much depends on if my talk submission to talk about Cell gets accepted. If it doesn't, then I probably won't be there. If it does, I still may not be there.
that's actually a really good point. Why don't we put a pin in this and have a discussion when we have a little bit more clarity after they get the talk acceptances out? Because perhaps.
Does anyone know when that's going to be?
I
August.
want to say it's like August 12th.
Yeah, it's right around that. So our next meeting
Around that
should
time.
be covered. Yeah.
Yeah, the acceptances rejections, I think, come out about at the time of our next meeting. So
Okay, so either we'll get it at the next one or we'll get it at the late August meeting.
Yeah.
But anyway, something for people to think about, whether you're watching here or perhaps watching on a recording. If you're into CCMs and you're into like testing and you're into making the community a better place and, you know, kind of lifting Kubernetes for everyone, I think it's a very aspirational talk. So, you know, I'd be happy to have anyone who wants to join along.
wonderful.
Okay, I guess, yeah. I don't know.
Do
Did
we
you have
have any
anything else on
other
that one?
topics? I don't have any other topics, but does anyone else have any other topics they want to bring up?
I might see if I can just use this opportunity to poke Kirtan. Kirtan, if you're still around, I have a couple
Yeah.
of PRs on Cloud Provider AWS fixing 2 bugs. Now, one of them needs a lot of rework, but I just kind of want to get some agreement that if I do spend the time to rework it, we might be able to merge it.
Sure. I thought like yours
Do
PR
we want
was
to drop a
approved
link in the
sometime
chat
back.
Yeah, let me
just so
find
that
that.
we can make sure we're talking about the same one?
So there's this one, which I think solves an issue and doesn't need rework. And then there is the second one is the more major one, which is talking about how the health checks work. So there was a couple of KEPs that went through last year, driven by Alexander Constantinescu, I think is his name, that talked about how the existing health checks in CCMs that load balancers are configuring don't work for external traffic policy local, and recommended a bunch of changes to how those work. I managed to get a change through with the Azure folks where it optionally changes to the new pattern. So I think we should probably do the same here and then over time tell people, hey, we're going to change the default, which again is what we kind of said we would do with the Azure folks. Basically, the GCP pattern that they had for a while works a lot better because the current pattern doesn't actually check the availability of that node to serve traffic. It checks the availability of the CNI, and so you basically don't get any connection draining with the current approach in AWS. Now, I had a ton of experiments on this in, I want to say March last year, whenever I did this. And we do a lot of disruption testing. And in our testing, we managed to use this patch to get from like 8 to 10 seconds down to 0 seconds of disruption when we were doing our disruption testing. So it made a big difference for us using the proper connection draining. It would be nice to have it in the upstream version as well. But yeah, I originally just went for just blanket change it and everyone can just deal with the change. But doing a softer approach, if that works for folks, I can go and rework that and we can get that merged.
Yeah, sure. I think even the I remember like reviewing them last time, and I thought there was some discussion going on, and then like not sure like what happened. Yeah, we can definitely take a review of this one.
Cool. Yeah, I'd appreciate a look at 752, and I will try and find some time in the near future to rework 622, so that we can get that one done. Cool.
Sure. Thanks, Jen.
Okay. I'm just looking now at the KubeCon timelines. And indeed, the CFP notifications go out Monday, August 12th. So US time. So certainly by Tuesday, August 13th, worldwide people will have figured out what's going on with their acceptance or rejection. And then the schedule, of course, gets announced Wednesday, August 14th, because people who get told, oh, too bad you're not traveling, like might have to turn down their acceptance or that sort of thing. So I think that's why they give them a couple of days to try to get that all to shake out before they announce. So yeah, by next time we meet, we should have a decent sense of at least which of us may or may not have something on the schedule. Probably not for the maintainer track ones, of course, but for the submitted ones for the main schedule.
Yeah, I mean, I feel generally positive about the idea that I'll be there, but you know how it is. Like, you never know.
I believe I will be there unless something significant changes. You know, like the Yellowstone caldera goes or something. I mean, there's like, unless there is a significant shift, I expect I will be there. Okay. Is there anything else we should talk about today? Right. Well, we'll get a chance to all chat in 2 weeks and hopefully have a better sense of which of us will see each other in Salt Lake City.
Cool. Thank you, Bridget.
Thanks, folks. Take care.